Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, we're going to do something a little unusual, and I'm going to focus on a negative. And we're going to look at Transformers EarthSpark, and at something the series did really, really wrong. Now, you know me, I like to focus on the positives, on the bright side. I like to pick apart what a show did right. But sometimes the mistake is just so glaringly obvious that you really can't ignore it. And this one is not just a technical mistake or bad acting. This is something that someone should have caught at some point in the production, but they didn't. I'm talking about a broken Aseop. That is when you have a story that's trying to tell a moral. I mean, this is a kids show. It's always been a kids show. Transformers has always been a franchise to sell toys to children. And then collectors as the fandom aged, but that's not what we're talking about today. And all kids shows try to put at least one good, sound moral lesson into every episode. You know, be nice to the weird kid at school because, you know, he's weird to you, but you're probably weird to him. Everybody's different. Love each other. Don't litter. Don't do drugs. And most of the time, these come off really good. But sometimes they try to pull it off either because of the world or the character matter. It just falls flat. The kind of big example that a lot of my older fans might remember is Captain Planet. He's the hero. I love that show as a kid. Had such a crush on Captain Planet. But they did the mandatory, because it was mandatory in the 90s, drug episode and how it was bad to do drugs and you shouldn't do drugs. But the way they framed it, the drug dealers, not the people who are actually suffering with the drug addiction, but the drug dealers kind of got off scot-free. And this is an example of how when you try to force in a moral, it doesn't always go over well. And we talked about that. We'll talk about that in a much later episode. But for this episode, I want to focus on what wasn't a deliberate moral put in, but they have one of the characters doing something very wrong. So what am I talking about? Well, there will be spoilers for episode 13. I guess it is, depending, no matter which counting mechanism you're using, either one of Amazon's or IMDb's, it is the episode that is titled Misconnection, the episode that focuses on the character Nightshade. Now, up till this now there will be spoilers for this episode, so be mindful of that. Now, this is a classic storyline from any kids show. You have one character that feels different from the other characters, and either as a core part of the character or discovering it in the show, they find a world of wonder and imagination in books. And this can sometimes or sometimes not cause the character to form a parasocial relationship with the author of the book. And this is something we all went through as kids. We thought how awesome the authors were to be able to write a book like this. And so it shows up in a lot of shows. And so you have a character who finds a new book series, really enjoys the new book series, and is inspired to go on an adventure as a result of that book series. And the book series theme all ties into the episode as a whole. Pretty standard kids show fare. So what went wrong? So here is the moral of this lesson, and I mentioned this in my review a few weeks ago, but I thought it was worth its own video. Kids, don't CyberStalk celebrities. Do not go to their physical address. Because that is what happened in this episode. Our main character, the one we're supposed to be rooting for, the one who's supposed to have the moral high ground in this episode, goes to cyberstalks the author of this book and attempts to go to the author's home address. And the negative consequences of this, the negative aspect of this is never addressed. And the show goes to some length to avoid addressing this. The parents never find out that Nightshade did this. And of course, the author ends up being, spoiler alert, dead of natural causes some time ago. And so the address that Nightshade ends up going to is a graveyard. Now, this might have been this concept of a Cybertronian or Terran wanting to talk to a human and finding them dead might have been a really, really important plot point. You could do some really deep, profound stories about that on the transience of human life and the fleeting nature of it. But that's not where this show goes. Instead, it has a child characters, again, cyberstalk an author and go to their personal address. Don't do that. And by having the author being long since dead and the address being a graveyard, the show completely sidesteps what would be some pretty problematic negative consequences. I mean, had the author been alive, finding a giant robot on your doorstep obsessed with you, even had the author responded in such a way as not to traumatize Nightshade, this would not have been a comfortable experience for the author. And while most authors are perfectly willing to interact with their fans, there is a very much spoken rule that you don't just show up at the author's house. Even as far back as the author of Little Women would kind of tongue-in-cheek complain about that happening, and that was back in the day when it was just much cooler to show up at people's houses. And just to summarize, I don't know what the production staff were thinking. In a children's show, the point of view character is usually supposed to be morally in the right. And some children's shows do shy away from that and show characters doing bad things, but that is not how this was framed. Nightshade is shown doing this, and Nightshade is shown to be perfectly justified. Again, the show doesn't actually go into any of the potential negative consequences, to the point that, again, it almost seems like the show was sidestepping it, which would suggest that the producers were aware of exactly how messed up this was and just didn't want to address it, which is kind of disturbing. But I'm kind of hoping that that this is just one of those subtle background things that nobody in production notices. So, to summarize, don't cyberstalk authors. Do not go to authors' places of residence, and respect people's privacy. Most authors have their email and contact information up. Anyone who actually did this would probably make the author feel incredibly uncomfortable, even if the author put on a facade of politeness at the time that their privacy was invaded. But what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I just blowing this up, making too much out of what is, after all, a children's show? Or is it a problem that a children's show, which is attempting to present moral behavior, seems to condone and endorse cyberstalking authors as long as you feel that you have an intense enough emotional connection with them? Please tell me what you think in the comments below the video. Hit that like and subscribe button. Go check out the links below the video to get yourself a copy of my book, Humans Are Weird. Let's work it out. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.